Welcome to Mornings with Megan. I'm here to give you the information, tools, and resources you need to make the best decisions for your body and your perimenopause.
Good morning and welcome back to Mornings with Megan. I'm Megan Piffner, certified nutrition specialist and perimenopause nutrition expert. This is part 3 of our series on sexual health and perimenopause, and I have been looking forward to this one. If you have not listened to parts 1 and parts 2, please go back. We covered a lot of ground. What is happening hormonally, the cultural weight women carry around sex, shore play, the spontaneity myth, lubrication and why your lube choices actually matter, and the importance of solo sex as body literacy. Today builds on all of it. Today, we're going to talk about vaginal estrogen, what it is, what it does, why it has been dramatically underused for decades, and why that is finally starting to change. We are also going to spend some time on anatomy because I think understanding what we are actually working with makes everything else in this series land differently. And I'm going to share some client stories that I think are going to feel very familiar. So let's go. I'm going to start with something that might seem basic, but I promise it's not: anatomy. Most of us were never actually taught the correct names for our own body parts. We got euphemisms, we got big gestures, we got kind of sex ed that was more interested in scaring us than informing us. So before we talk about what estrogen does to the tissue, I want to make sure that we are all working with the same vocabulary, because you cannot advocate for yourself with a healthcare practitioner if you do not know what to call what you are describing. Dr. Rachel Rubin, board certified urologist and sexual medicine expert, says it best: when you give women information about how their bodies work, they make great decisions for themselves. That is exactly what we are going to do right now. So, for those of you with this anatomy, this talk is about what you actually have. First, there are 3 openings: the urethra, which is where urine comes out, the vaginal opening, and the anus. I mention this because a surprising number of people are genuinely not sure which is which, and that is not a personal failing. That is a failure of education. Second, what most people call their vagina is actually their vulva. The vagina is internal. It is the canal that connects the uterus to the outside body. You cannot see it from the outside. If you want to actually see your vagina, your gynecologist uses a speculum to do that. What you can see from the outside is your vulva, and both the vulva and the vagina are significantly affected by the hormonal changes of perimenopause. We will get into exactly how in a few minutes. Here's what I want you to do: get a hand mirror, find a good light, and actually look. I know that might feel strange or uncomfortable if you've never done it, but knowing what your body looks like is useful. You cannot notice changes if you have no baseline. So, the anatomy of the vulva, working from the outside in. The labia majora, the outer lips. These are the larger, often hair-bearing folds on the outside. They protect everything inside. The labia minora, the inner lips. These are the smaller, hairless folds inside the labia majora. And here is something worth knowing: they vary enormously from person to person. They can be barely visible or several centimeters long. They can look symmetrical or asymmetrical. They can be pink, red, purple, brown, or nearly black. All of this is completely normal. All of it. The clitoris. Most people know the clitoris as a small external nub at the top of the vulva, where the labia minora meet. But the visible part is actually just the tip. The full clitoral structure extends internally on either side of the vaginal canal and is much larger than what you can see. It is packed with nerve endings, more than anywhere else in the human body. And as far as current science knows, it exists just for pleasure. That deserves a moment of appreciation. The urethra, a small opening just below the clitoris, above the vaginal opening. This is where urine exits. The urethral tissue surrounding it is also estrogen sensitive, which is why vaginal dryness and recurrent UTIs are so closely connected. More on that shortly. The vaginal opening, the entrance to the vaginal canal itself. Now, here's something I want to address directly because it comes up more than you might think. Vulva owners do a lot of comparing, and in the absence of accurate information and images of real diverse bodies, that comparing tends to happen against pornography and other highly curated images, which represent an extraordinarily narrow slice of what vulvas actually look like. The research documents labioplasty procedures being performed on girls in early adolescence, some before they have even finished puberty. Vulva owners are having surgery to reshape their labia because they have never seen a vulva that looks like theirs and concluded that something must be wrong with them. That is heartbreaking, and it is entirely a product of inadequate education and distorted media representation. Your vulva is normal, whatever it looks like. I want to send you to 2 resources that I think are genuinely wonderful. The Vulva Gallery at thevulvagallery.com, illustrated portraits of real vulvas with personal stories used by the NHS and in sex education programs. The Labia Library at labialibrary.org.au by Women's Health Victoria, photographs of real labia in all of their variety created specifically to counter the pressure towards labiaplasty. Read the testimonials on the website. Vulva owners in their 60s are saying that this is the first time that they've ever felt normal. I will link both in the show notes. And while we're on the subject, there's an art installation called The Great Wall of Vulva by British artist Jamie McCartney. Plaster casts of over 400 vulvas. 400, all of them different. Also linked in the show notes. Go check it out. Before we move on, I want to address two things that come up constantly and nobody talks about them clearly enough. The first is discharge. Vaginal discharge and first cervical mucus are normal. They are healthy. They are your body doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Here's the quick version. Cervical mucus is produced by the cervix and changes throughout your cycle in response to estrogen. Around ovulation, when estrogen peaks, it becomes clearer, stretchy, and abundant. What you may have heard described as egg white consistency. That is your fertile window signaling itself. Outside of ovulation, it tends to be thicker, less noticeable, or absent. This is completely normal cycle variation. Self-lubrication during arousal is a different process entirely. That is the vaginal wall producing fluid in response to arousal. Both are normal, and both are your body functioning correctly. I want to mention this specifically because when my hormone levels shifted in perimenopause, I noticed my cervical mucus became very sparse. It was actually one of the things that tipped me off that something hormonal had changed. And once I adjusted my MHT and my estrogen stabilized, it came back and has actually lasted longer through my cycle than it used to because estrogen is what drives that mucus production. Your hormones show up in ways that you might not expect. I also want to name something I hear from vulva owners regularly: shame and confusion around having any discharge at all. Women worry that they are dirty or gross. They are not. A healthy vagina produces discharge. It's self cleaning. Think of it as a self cleaning oven. It manages its own pH, its own microbiome, and its own housekeeping. It does not need your help on the inside. What that means in practice: you do not need to wash inside your vagina. You do not need to douche. You do not need any internal cleansing product. And in fact, doing so disrupts the very ecosystem that keeps things healthy. The vagina cleans itself. What you can do is wash the vulva, the outside, gently with mild, unscented soap and water. That's it. And this brings me to something that I want to say very directly and clearly, and I will be saying it in much more depth in future episodes on environmental exposures and endocrine disruptors. Your vagina should not smell like flowers. It should not smell like summer breeze or fresh linen or tropical fruit. Those are marketing inventions designed to make you feel like your normal, healthy body is a problem that needs to be solved. The scented products designed for use in or around the vaginal area, sprays, wipes, douches, and scented pads, often contain fragrance chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, meaning they interfere with your hormones. And putting endocrine disruptors on the most absorbent tissue in your body is not a great idea. Your vagina has a scent. It's supposed to. That scent can change throughout your cycle, after sex, and during perimenopause as the tissue and microbiome shift. If something smells significantly different or off to you, that is worth mentioning to your provider as a potential sign of an infection or a pH disruption. But the answer is never a scented product. More on all of this when we do a dedicated episode on personal care products and endocrine disruptors. For now, gentle soap on the outside, leave the inside alone, and your vagina should not smell like a candle. Now that we know the parts and how they all work normally, let's talk about what happens to them when estrogen declines. Every structure that we just named, the labia majora, the labia minora, the clitoris, the urethral tissue, and the vaginal walls, all of it is estrogen sensitive. Estrogen maintains the thickness, elasticity, and moisture of all of that tissue. When estrogen declines during perimenopause, the tissue changes throughout the entire area. The labia may become thinner and less full. The clitoris can become less sensitive over time, which can affect arousal and time it takes to get there and the ability to orgasm. The urethral tissue thins, losing its natural protective thickness, which shifts the local microbiome and makes infection more likely. And the vaginal walls become thinner, less elastic, drier, and more vulnerable to micro tears and irritation. This is genitourinary syndrome of menopause, GSM. And I want to be very clear: GSM is not just a sexual health issue. It affects urinary health, comfort in daily life, the ability to exercise without discomfort, and quality of life in ways that have nothing to do with whether you are sexually active. It affects most vulva owners going through perimenopause and menopause at some point to some degree. And it is progressive, meaning it tends to get worse over time if it's not addressed. One more thing worth mentioning that most people have never heard of: GSM is not exclusive to menopause. Dr. Rachel Rubin has been instrumental in naming and documenting what is called genital urinary syndrome of lactation. postpartum breastfeeding people can experience the same GSM like symptoms because birth temporarily sends the body into a menopause like hormonal state. Estrogen drops significantly and dramatically after delivery. This can make postpartum tissue changes and discomfort significantly worse on top of everything else the body is already recovering from. Local vaginal estrogen can be used to treat this as well. It is a conversation worth having with your provider if you're postpartum and struggling, and one that is very rarely offered. I want to share two client stories here because they illustrate very different entry points into this conversation. The first client came to me primarily for nutrition support. She'd been dealing with recurrent UTIs for a couple of years, 3 or 4 times a year. She was on antibiotics repeatedly, so we were doing lots of gut work. She was doing everything right from a hydration and hygiene perspective, and nothing was breaking the cycle. She had no idea that her UTIs were connected to her hormones, and she was not experiencing any pain during sex. She had not noticed any significant dryness. She just kept getting UTIs, and nobody had connected them to the tissue changes happening in her urethral area as her estrogen declined. Vaginal estrogen was not on her radar at all because she didn't think that she had a vaginal estrogen problem. She thought she had a UTI problem. Once she started the vaginal estrogen, the UTI stopped. The second client described her vagina as, and I'm going to quote her directly, shriveled up and dead. She said she had essentially stopped having sex because it was uncomfortable, and she had assumed this was just what was happening now, and she felt a mix of grief and resignation about it. She had not brought it up with her doctor because she felt embarrassed and because she genuinely didn't think that there was anything could be done. When we talked through what was actually happening, the tissue changes, why they were happening, what vaginal estrogen does, she almost cried with relief. The idea that this was addressable, that she did not have to accept it, was genuinely shocking to her. She started vaginal estrogen, gave it a few months, and reported back that things were dramatically better. Not immediately perfect, but dramatically better. And more importantly, she started to feel like herself again. Both of these women had something addressable that nobody told them about. That is exactly the problem that we're trying to solve. So let's get to the treatment itself. Vaginal estrogen is a low dose estrogen applied locally, directly to the vaginal tissue. It comes in several forms: a cream, a ring that sits inside the vagina and releases estrogen slowly over time, and a suppository inserted with a small applicator or a tablet. Your provider can help you figure out which format is best for your life and your preferences. The key word is local. Vaginal estrogen works where it's applied. According to the research, local vaginal estrogen does not affect blood levels of estrogen. This is why it has completely different safety profile from systemic hormonal therapy, and why the warning that kept so many women and providers away from it for decades were not actually based on evidence about this specific product. What it does: it restores thickness, elasticity, and moisture to the vaginal and urethral tissue. It improves lubrication. It supports a healthier local microbiome, which reduces UTI risk. Research shows that local vaginal hormones reduce the risk of UTIs by more than 50%. It reduces friction and the micro tears that lead to irritation and infection. It makes sex more comfortable. It reduces urinary urgency and frequency for many women. And one analysis found that using preventative local vaginal estrogen therapy could save Medicare patients between $1,200 and $4,900 annually and reduce infections and related treatments. Because it addresses the underlying tissue changes rather than just lubricating over them, the effects are cumulative. It tends to keep working better over time. It typically takes 6 to 12 weeks to notice significant changes. Consistency is key. Here's the history because it matters. In 2002, a large study called the Women's Health Initiative looked at hormone therapy in postmenopausal women and found associations with increased risk of breast cancer, heart disease, blood clots, and stroke. The study made enormous headlines. Women stopped taking hormone therapy in huge numbers, and the FDA put a black box warning, their most serious safety alert, on all estrogen products. All of them, including low dose vaginal estrogen, which was not studied in the research. The black box warning stayed on for over 2 decades. It scared patients, it scared providers. Many gynecologists became reluctant to prescribe vaginal estrogen and bring it up. Women who asked about it were sometimes actively discouraged, and the tissue changes of GSM, which are progressive and much easier to address earlier rather than later, went untreated in millions of women who either did not know the option existed or were afraid of it. In November of 2025, the FDA announced the removal of the black box warning from low dose vaginal estrogen products following a comprehensive review of the evidence. The major medical societies, urology, gynecology, urogynecology, have been pushing this for years. The science was clear. The warning was not supported by the data on this specific product, and it was actively harming women by keeping them from safe and effective treatment. As of February 2026, the first batch of products with the updated labeling has been approved, with more rolling out across manufacturers now. And there's more coming. The FDA commissioner has publicly stated that the agency is actively working to make vaginal estrogen available over the counter without a prescription, citing its profound benefits for preventing UTIs and reducing painful sex. That would be a significant shift in access, particularly for women who do not have easy access to a gynecologist or whose providers have been reluctant to prescribe it. Vaginal estrogen is considered safe for the vast majority of vulva owners. Research also confirms that it is safe for breast cancer survivors and those currently undertaking breast cancer treatment, though it's always a direct conversation to have with your oncologist given individual circumstances. If you are experiencing any of the following, vaginal estrogen is worth asking your provider about: vaginal dryness or discomfort, pain or reduced pleasure during sex, changes in the time it takes to become aroused or reach orgasm, recurrent UTIs, urinary urgency or leaking, or any general discomfort in the vulval area. You do not have to be in crisis to ask. You do not have to be postmenopausal. You do not have to be at a certain age. If any of these changes are affecting your quality of life, this conversation is worth having now. If your provider seems to be defaulting to outdated concerns about the old black box warning, you can gently let them know that the warning has been removed and ask them to review the current evidence. Dr. Rachel Rubin has a prescriber guide available on her website that you can print and bring to your appointment. It gives clinicians the information they need to diagnose and prescribe the treatment for GSM. There is a whole generation of providers who were never taught what GSM is or how to treat it. You can help educate yours. For finding a perimenopause informed provider, the Menopause Society has a provider finder at menopause.org. Dr. Kelly Casperson's podcast, You're Not Broken, and her book by the same name are all excellent resources for understanding the space more broadly. If your provider dismisses you, if you were told that this is just aging or something to accept, that is a signal to find someone else who's current on the research. The research is clear. You deserve a provider who knows it. I want to close the clinical section with my own experience because I think this makes an abstract concrete. I had a complicated starting point with this. When I was on birth control for 20 years, the dryness was significant, painful enough that using tampons was uncomfortable because they would catch and pull on my vaginal walls. That was my baseline for a long time. When I finally got off birth control in my mid 30s, I had about 7 years of what I can only describe as glorious, very effective self lubrication. It was revelatory after what I had known. So when things started shifting again in my early 40s, already in perimenopause and on MHT, the change was subtler than what I had experienced before. This was not an extreme dryness of my birth control years. Things were still lubricated, just less so. Sex was not painful, but there was some more friction than there used to be, or awareness of discomfort at certain positions, a low grade thing I had gotten so used to that I had almost stopped consciously noticing it. My partner noticed some of these things before I had fully processed what was happening and asked questions. We tried adjusting foreplay, slowing down, giving things more time. We eventually added lube, which helped, but it wasn't the same as it had been before. So I went to my gynecologist and asked for vaginal estrogen. It was one of the best decisions that I had made from my personal health perspective. Within a few months, the tissue felt different, more resilient, more like itself. Sex was comfortable again, and that low grade background awareness that I had been quietly accommodating around was gone. That is how GSM can develop. You adapt, you work around it. You think that it is just whatever it is now. And then something changes and you realize how much you had normalized without ever naming it. You don't have to normalize it. Before I close, I want to point out to you that everything we mentioned today, on my website at meganpifnernutrition.com, there's an article called Self Pleasure is Good for Your Health by Jenna Osniak. Jenna is a sexual health and sex tech journalist with over a decade of experience covering intimacy, technology, and sexual well-being, and the founder of Sex for Everybody, an online publication dedicated to inclusive, accessible sexual health and sex education. It is a wonderful complement to everything in this series. Links are in the show notes. So that is the series. 3 episodes on something that affects most vulva owners going through this transition and that almost nobody is talking about clearly enough. Here's what I want you to walk away with. Your sexuality does not expire at perimenopause. Your pleasure matters. Not as a bonus, not as a bonus, not as something to get when everything else is handled, but as a real, legitimate part of your health and quality of life. The research supports it, the biology supports it, and you deserve a healthcare team that takes it seriously. The changes that come with perimenopause are real. The hormonal shifts, the tissue changes, the libido fluctuations, they're all real and all, to a significant degree, addressable. You do not have to white knuckle through this. You do not have to accept it, and you do not have to suffer in silence. You now have the vocabulary. You have the framework. You know what questions to ask and where to find the resources. Go have the conversation with yourself, with your partner, and with your provider. She matters. You matter. I will see you next week.
Can you do me a favor? If this was helpful, share it with one person who might need to hear it today. Our bodies didn't come with a user manual, and this perimenopause thing can feel confusing and lonely. But you're not alone, you're not crazy, and you're definitely not broken. And maybe someone in your life needs that reminder too. Let's spread the word and be kind to each other and ourselves. Now the legal bit. I'm a nutritionist, but I'm not your nutritionist. This podcast is for information and education only. No client relationship was formed. Always seek medical advice when necessary. I'll see you next Wednesday morning.